Hello everybody, my name is Stratos, and well, you read the title of this video. But before we get started, if you find any of these tips helpful, make sure to like and also subscribe. And if you think I missed something or have any tips that you feel like might be helpful to others, definitely leave a comment, because if something is good, I'll definitely pin it. Anyways, let's get right into this. All right, let's get started with the most obvious. Number one, avoid the cube. It can be really tough for beginners to make something that isn't a cube due to almost every block in Minecraft being, well, a literal block. An easy way to get around this is just to add extra shapes to your build. You know, with just one single extra cube, you now have another room and it can make the shape look a lot more interesting. You know, but it has other benefits. You know, you get extra interior space and all that kind of stuff, and that alone adds complexity to the build itself. And it can get really interesting when you start adding circles or maybe building on diagonals. So it can be super beneficial just by incorporating extra shapes. All right, next up we have another obvious one, depth. This one expands off the first tip greatly, and it's reiterated by a lot of other building YouTubers. It can seriously help just to turn a super ordinary plain looking build and do something really, really cool, just with something simple like adding a foundation or using glass panes instead of glass blocks. You know, depth helps break up the monotony of a plain looking wall. You know, just instead of it being flat, you have something more interesting to look at, something that helps draw your eyes around. You know, my favorite is adding support pillars or adding these trapdoors as window shutters. You know, you can also add plants, plant pots, stuff like this. You can add fence gates or, you know, signs as trim. All of these help really, really accentuate the depth. And if you get really crazy, you can add some stairs, whether upside down or, well, regular orientation, to help kind of like give a little bit more darkness to areas. You know, it's just something that helps add. Like, you look at this wall, and then you look at this wall that has none of that extra stuff on it, and you can tell how big of a difference it makes. Obviously, you want to be very sparse with it, because having too much, well, obviously will detract from the build rather than add to it. Number 3, gradients and textures. This is where things get a little wacky and crazy. Gradients are an excellent example of how to add intricacy to a build without necessarily adding the physical depth. You know, especially at a distance, these help like fool the eye into viewing shadows or highlights in areas where there technically aren't none. And that illusion provides quote unquote depth to a build, you know, like I said, without actually incorporating any of these techniques. You know, I have a couple examples here. We got cobblestone to green bamboo. We have, you know, crimson logs to cherry leaves. We got a brown texture gradient here with a mangrove to packed mud, and then a very classic one, we have red sandstone all the way up to the warped stem block using the color gradient that's already built into the copper block. And I've built this huge tower here to give you an example of how distance really plays a huge role in texture and shadow. So from this super far distance, you can kind of get a grasp of at least how a shadow works under that window trim. So using the darker blocks and some coal ore, you can definitely tell it's almost like the sun is hitting and bouncing off of that window and leaving that extra shadow there, and it can really help with super big builds like this. Now obviously the black stone to regular stone is a bit of a drastic shift, and I tried my hardest to make it look a little bit better, but the basalt kind of sticks out with its very harsh edges. But even just doing a deep slate to the stone or just straight up the basalt to the stone, it can really add a lot to your builds. And texture gets a little bit more interesting if you have a plain flat building like that modern house over here. If you just add other similar white blocks with different textures instead of just plain old concrete, it really helps bring more of a pop, again, especially at a distance. where you put your super intricate designs down close to the bottom and your less intricate close to the top, it almost looks like the build has sort of a natural wear to it, a natural scuff to it. If you're more interested in learning about gradients and color theory and textures, there's a YouTuber I highly recommend. His name is B000100. I'm sure most of you have heard of him if you're into building in Minecraft. He does some crazy excellent work with gradients, and he's a great source of learning about getting more intricate with your building in general. Now, that of course being said leads us to number 4, inspiration. Sometimes just loading into a world and messing around isn't the best way to learn or generate ideas. That's why I suggest, if you don't already, which is kind of rare, try watching a handful of other Minecraft YouTubers. See how they build, what's their process, how they go about things, the styles and techniques that they choose for certain builds. Really pay attention to it, and hopefully you'll be able to grow and produce amazing builds on your own by being kind of guided by them. I recommend nearly anyone from the Hermitcraft server. Obviously, I got some bias. Good Times with Scar, B00, Corrales, Pearlescent Moon, Gemini Tay, any of those. Literally just a small few. Just by observing them, you can get inspired to build in a similar style or learn little tricks that you may have never seen before. You can also use social media like Instagram or Pinterest to find ideas for cool builds as well. All right, number 5, we have roof shape. Everybody knows the classic A-frame. It's a part of almost every basic Minecraft structure, especially villager houses. But it's not the only kind of roof design. It's important to be creative and build within a certain style. Obviously, modern roofs have an extremely flat, style. Oriental builds have almost a pyramid shape, and they can get more complex as you go along. So it's important to learn and mix and match to your preferred style. And a great way to break up plain roofs is to add chimneys. Just straight up add a chimney, add some gutters. Chimneys are a great way, and they can be realistic because, well, not functional, but realistic by putting furnaces underneath them for interiors. And like I said, it's just a very good way to break up plain old roofs. And finally, number 6, this is a rare one. We have outline and focus. I don't see a lot of people discuss this, and that's possibly because it incorporates a whole bunch of the other tips, but basically it really helps when you accentuate the focal point of your build. Example, using blocks to outline a door, entranceways, exits, windows. You want to naturally draw the eyes to locations that you feel like are worthy of people's attention. So it's important to not only design around that by adding gradients, textures, but also to physically build around that, so you can very clearly see the depth in here, as well as the gradient and color textures. And you could get so much more intricate with this, but seriously, adding these focal points makes builds 10 times better. And that is it. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you found these tips helpful. Some of them may have been super obvious, but others may not have been, especially if you're new or just trying to learn how to get better. Like I mentioned earlier, if you feel like I left something out, do not hesitate to leave a comment. I will read them, and I'm sure other people will read them and find them helpful as well. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed trying these techniques out for your future builds, and I'll see you around.